Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or votes objected to under Clause 6 of Rule 20. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to suspend the rules and pass House Concurrent Resolution 1-5.
Right. The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Calendar Number 7, House Concurrent Resolution 15, Concurrent Resolution authorizing the use of the Capitol grounds for the National Peace Officers Memorial Service and the National Honor Guard and Pipe Band Exhibition.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, and the gentlewoman from Nevada, Ms. Titus, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, and I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record of Concurrent Resolution 1-5. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. I'm proud to have introduced
without
this resolution.
objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to have introduced this resolution along with Economic Development Subcommittee Ranking Member Titus of Nevada. This resolution authorizes the use of the Capitol grounds for the 42nd Annual National Peace Officers Memorial Event to honor law enforcement officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice. These men and women put on their uniforms each day to serve and protect our communities and our families. Violent crime continues to be a daily tragedy in this country, and we've seen it, as a matter of fact, today again. It is critical that we recognize police officers are doing an extremely difficult and dangerous job, day in, day out, 365 days a year to keep Americans safe. To all the law enforcement officers who put on the badge each day, who wear it with honor and distinction, we say thank you, and we support you. This resolution is just one small way we can demonstrate our support for these officers and their families and honor the men and women who lost their lives in the line of duty in 2022, including, unfortunately, 19 individuals from my home state of Pennsylvania. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this resolution and reserve the balance.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentlewoman from Nevada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. I, too, rise in support of House Concurrent Resolution 15, which authorizes the use of the Capitol grounds for the 42nd Annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service and the National Honor Guard and Pipe Band Exhibition. As the ranking member of the subcommittee that oversees our public buildings, it's my honor to carry this resolution alongside Subcommittee Chair, Mr. Perry. The memorial service, which will be held on May 15th, will be coordinated with the architect of the Capitol and the Capitol Police, and it will honor 557 officers whose names will be added to the memorial, including 9 from Nevada. The memorial will also continue to recognize the sacrifice of law enforcement during the pandemic, as they served among the millions of frontline and essential workers who day in and day out risked their lives and their family safety to keep us safe while we slowed the spread of that deadly virus. We cannot bring back those that we've lost, but we can honor the sacrifice they made to keep ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities safe. I'd like to note the officers from Southern Nevada who made the ultimate sacrifice. Bailiff Gerald Bear Smith served in the Pahrump Justice Court since 2009, and he's remembered for his constant compassion in going out of his way to do anything he could to help the people of Pahrump. Bailiff Smith passed away on January 18, 2021 from complications as a result of contracting COVID in the line of duty. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Officer Philip Closey, who served in the department for 21 years, including working closely with local students as part of the DARE program, and he previously served as a firefighter and paramedic. Officer Closey passed away on August 11, 2021, from complications, again as a result of contracting COVID in the line of duty. Sergeant Douglas King served 17 years in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and prior to his death was set to receive the department's Medal of Honor for placing himself in danger to save the life of a domestic violence victim. On August the 23rd, 2021, Sergeant King passed away from complications as a result of contracting COVID in the line of duty. Senior Federal Air Marshal Sean Hennessy was a member of the Federal Air Marshal Service for nearly 19 years and spent an additional 13 years serving in the U.S. Air Force. Based out of the Las Vegas field office, he dedicated his life to protecting passengers and crew from threats to their safety in the skies. Federal Air Marshal Hennessy passed away on August 26, 2021, with complications as a result of contracting COVID in the line of duty. Police Officer Edward Contreras served the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for over 15 years, in addition to his service in the U.S. Marine Corps, where he was deployed to both Somalia and Iraq. Officer Contreras passed away on September 28, 2021, from complications as a result of contracting COVID in the line of duty. Special U.S. Deputy Marshal Jose Gomez was a United States Marine Corps Reserve veteran who served with the United States Marshal Service for 22 years. While serving with the Lloyd D. George Courthouse in Las Vegas, Special Deputy Gomez contracted COVID-19 in the line of duty and passed away on February 6, 2022. This was a cruel disease that took away many of our very brave frontline law enforcement and emergency responders. Detective Justin Terry humbly served in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for nearly 21 years and was committed to protecting children in the community from sexual assault and abuse. A sworn task force officer with the U.S. Marshal's Office, Detective Terry passed away on June 10, 2022, after a tragic accident in the Northwest Valley. And Police Officer Trung Thai was proud to be a Vietnamese American officer in Las Vegas, a 23-year veteran of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. He devoted his time on patrol and served in the Financial Crimes Unit and mentored countless new recruits. On October 13, 2022, Officer Thai was shot and killed while responding to a domestic disturbance call. My condolences are with the families and loved ones of these brave public servants and all those who are mourning the loss of the 557 courageous men and women whose duty and sacrifice will be commemorated at this year's memorial. I urge the House to join me in supporting this tribute to our fallen law officers. It's the least that we can do. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Nevada reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers, and I'm prepared to close, and I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Nevada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, have no more speakers, and I will close by saying that this is a very fitting thing for us to do here on the Capitol grounds, and I hope that all our colleagues will join Mr. Perry and me in voting in favor of this memorial service.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In closing, I want to reiterate not only my support, but my thanks to the gentlelady from Nevada for her support of this as well, for concurrent resolution 15, and more importantly, most importantly, for my and our support for the men and women who put their lives on the line each day to protect our communities and families. Mr. Speaker, I urge support of this resolution and yield back the balance of the time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Concurrent Resolution 15? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, The rules are suspended. The concurrent resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. We're good to go. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1154.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1154, a bill to combat forced organ harvesting and trafficking in persons for purposes of the removal of organs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, and the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Wild, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection, excuse me.
I also ask unanimous consent to place in the record an exchange of letters with the Committee on the Judiciary.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman reserves. Oh, I'm sorry. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, every year under General Secretary Xi Jinping and his Chinese Communist Party, between 60,000 to 100,000 young victims, average age 28, are murdered in cold blood to steal their organs. These crimes against humanity are unimaginably cruel. Ethnic groups targeted for this mass harvesting include Uyghurs, who suffer from Xi Jinping's ongoing genocide, and the Falun Gong, whose peaceful meditation and exercise practices and exceptional good health make their organs highly desirable. The Chinese Communist Party has declared them to be an evil cult fit for butchering. Mr. Speaker, in May of last year, I chaired an absolutely chilling congressional hearing at the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission entitled Forced Organ Harvesting in China, Examining the Evidence. The China Tribunal, chaired by Sir Jeffrey Nice, and this is the man who prosecuted Slobodan Milosevic at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, a tribunal that I worked very hard on and was very supportive of, as were other members of this body. He conducted the world's first independent legal analysis of forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China. Sir Jeffrey Nice testified at my hearing and said, quote, forced organ harvesting has been committed for years throughout China on a significant scale. And he said that the Falun Gong practitioners have been one and probably the main source of organ supply. He said the Falun Gong and the Uyghurs in the PRC each qualify as a group for purposes of the crime of genocide. Ethan Gutman, Senior Research Fellow in China Studies, Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, testified that the Kilgore-Mattis-Gutman report of 2016 estimated China's total transplant volume, this is forced transplantations, as 60 to 100,000 annually. Mr. Gutman also pointed out that, and I quote him, at any given time since 2017, there are approximately 1 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyzstan individuals, and others in the camps. These are the concentration camps, of course, made up mostly of Muslims. And he said that his estimate is that 25,000 to 50,000 camp detainees are being harvested every year. Again, he says 28-year-olds from Xinjiang camps can be harvested for 2 or 3 organs each, translating into a maximum of about 150,000 organs. Another expert witness who testified at our hearing, Matthew Robertson of the Australian National University, co-authored with Dr. Jacob Laviv an examination of Chinese medical journal articles and found that, quote, 71 papers gave explicit descriptions of surgeons appearing to violate the dead donor rule while procuring hearts from prisoners. In plain language, the papers appear to show that the donors who were prisoners were alive at the time of surgery and were killed by transplant surgeons in the process of heart extraction, close quote. Their work, published last April in a top peer-reviewed U.S. medical journal, the American Journal of Transplantation, provided additional evidence of the People's Republic of China's egregious practices in violation of international standards, and these are, again, crimes against humanity. Robert Destro, the former Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, testified the size and the scope of the organ harvesting and trafficking market is, his words, staggering. Mr. Speaker, we also know through open source Chinese language media that elderly, high-ranking Chinese Communist Party officials have received replacement organs from the very people they despise, like the Falun Gong, like the Uyghurs, and oppose. And there's one particular hospital, Army Hospital 301 in Beijing, that excels at this. While this still shocks me, and I know it shocks my colleagues, I cannot say it surprises me. Almost 25 years ago, I chaired a hearing, and Doug Anderson, who was sitting right here, was a part of that as part of the top staff of the committee. I chaired a human rights hearing with a Chinese security officer who testified that he and other security agents were executing patients with the doctors right there and ambulances ready to harvest their organs after the bullets were fired. Indeed, at last year's hearing, we produced a doctor who testified that he had performed one such surgery on a victim. He was forced to, he claimed, a botched execution, who began cutting. As he began cutting, discovered that the victim was in a state of shock. He wasn't dead yet. A live vivisection on a living human being. He has nightmares to this day. To combat these heinous and inhumane practices, the Stop Organ Harvesting Act of 2023, a bipartisan piece of legislation, amends the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 to require reports on forced organ harvesting and trafficking in persons for purpose of the removal of organs in foreign countries, including and especially in China. The imposition of serious sanctions on any person the President determines funds, sponsors, or otherwise facilitates forced organ harvesting or trafficking for purpose of removal of organs. And what does that mean? Civil penalties up to $250,000, and criminal penalties include a fine of up to $1 million and imprisonment for not more than 20 years or both. So we're serious about sanctioning this egregious practice. Sanctions also include blocking and prohibiting all transactions in property and interest in property, and making such persons inadmissible to the United States and ineligible to receive a visa. State-sponsored forced organ harvesting is big business for Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, and shows absolutely no sign of abating, which is why we and the rest of the world needs to step up, particularly the democracies of this world. We must act. I say to my colleagues, we must act decisively. I would like to thank Chairman McCall for his co-sponsorship and his tremendous leadership on this bill, as well as Ranking Member Meeks for both of their strong support, and our Democratic co-sponsor, Bill Keating, as well as Kathy Manning, for their strong support for this and co-sponsorship of this legislation. And a very special thanks to Mary Vigil, Janice Kagayutan, who is sitting over here on my right, on the Democrat side, Pierre Otazi, who's the General Counsel for the China Commission, of which I am chairman, and Doug Anderson, who's done a wonderful job throughout all of this, and Mary McDermott Noonan, my Chief of Staff, all of who worked so diligently in such a cooperative and bipartisan way to bring this piece of legislation to the floor. I reserve the balance of our time.
Reserves. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1154, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman's recognized.
This measure, authored by Representative Chris Smith, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations, of which I am the ranking member. He has been a longtime leader in this body on human rights challenges, and I'm glad to be supporting this measure today. I look forward to continuing to work with him to address many important global human rights challenges in the coming months on our subcommittee. I also want to thank Representative Keating, the Democratic co-lead of this measure, for working across the aisle to refine this bill and make it bipartisan. According to the State Department's 2022 country reports on human rights practices, there have been troubling reports regarding the PRC forcibly harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience, including religious and spiritual adherents. This is beyond the pale and absolutely unacceptable. It is important, therefore, that the State Department look more deeply into this issue. H.R. 1154 shines a light on this horrible practice and calls on the State Department to make its annual reporting on the issue more robust and in-depth. Not only does it call for more regular assessments of the problem, it also imposes sanctions on individuals that are involved in forced organ harvesting and trafficking. This legislation will make sure that the United States is carefully gathering all of the facts to make an informed assessment regarding the magnitude and prevalence of this problem. We should never look away from injustice and repression wherever it takes place. In that spirit, I support this legislation, and I urge all of my colleagues to support it. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve our time.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further.
Gentleman reserves.
I have no further requests for time, and I am prepared to close if the other side has no further speakers.
Yes, Speaker, sorry.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserved.
All right, the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania reserves.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1154.
The gentlewoman is recognized. Yes.
H.R. 1154 is an important bipartisan measure. We know that organ harvesting has been a problem in China. We also know that PRC officials in Xinjiang have collected biometric data from Uyghur and other ethnic minority detainees. Given the ongoing genocide in Xinjiang, we simply cannot take Beijing at its word about what it is and is not doing. We need to investigate and we need to verify. H.R. 1154 does just that. It calls on the State Department to provide important information to Congress, to the American public, as well as to the world about the scope of organ harvesting and trafficking around the world so that we may respond appropriately. I urge my colleagues to support this measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. And I just want to close by first thanking Ms. Wild for her strong support, her wonderful and strong remarks today in favor of this bipartisan legislation. I do believe that we are really at a point now where, if not us, who? We need to speak. We need to speak boldly. And this legislation, again, which was crafted across the aisle, we've worked very closely together on it, I believe will make a huge difference. I would say to anyone who's ever been in the hospital, not so long ago, I was actually in the intensive care thing. I'm fine now, but when I was sitting there, laying there, I kept thinking about this bill and some poor 28-year-old in the People's Republic of China who is not there and being treated in a benign way by doctors and nurses, but is being strapped down and not always anesthetized sufficiently to steal their organs and to kill them. It is happening, as I indicated earlier, and this is a very reliable number, between 60 to 100,000 times against 60 to 100,000 28-year-olds each and every year. This is Nazi-like. Xi Jinping needs to be held to account. And the fact that he and the high officials of the Chinese Communist Party are benefiting not just with unbelievable amounts of money for the Chinese Communist Party and for them personally, but also if they need any organ, they turn to the very people that they hate, especially Falun Gong and Muslim Uyghurs, in order to procure their organs. So this has to get, I believe, strong support from this body, strong support from the Senate, and hopefully I believe it'll be signed by the president if we could get it to his desk. We need to make this different. So I urge members to vote yes. Yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1154? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.
I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1107 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1107, a bill to direct the Secretary of State to take certain actions with respect to the labeling of the People's Republic of China as a developing country and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, and the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Wild, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to place in the record an exchange of letters with the Committee on Ways and Means.
Without objection. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield such time as she may consume to the gentlelady from California, Congresswoman Young Kim, who chairs the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Indo-Pacific and is the author of this important legislation.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Speaker, and I would like to thank Congressman Chris Smith for yielding. I rise in strong support of H.R. 1107. The PRC is not a Developing Country Act. This is a bipartisan bill I introduced with my colleague Jerry Connolly to address the People's Republic of China's exploitation of its status as a developing country in treaties and in international organizations. The People's Republic of China is the world's second largest economy, accounting for 18.6% of the global economy. Their economy size is second only to the United States. United States is treated as a developed country, so should PRC. And it's also treated as a high-income country in treaties and international organizations, so China should also be treated as a developed country. However, PRC is still classified as a developing country, and they're using this status to game the system and hurt countries that are truly in need. The PRC exploits their developing country status by applying for development assistance and loans from international organizations, despite spending trillions of infrastructure projects in developing countries as part of their debt trap diplomacy scheme known as the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, PRC's withdrawal of loans takes away from actual developing countries and helps the PRC finance its Belt and Road program. We are long overdue to level the playing field. This legislation rights this wrong by requiring the Secretary of State to oppose the labeling or treatment of the PRC as a developing country in any international organization or treaty to which the United States is a party. It also directs the Secretary to seek mechanisms in international organizations to change the status of PRC from a developing to developed country. We cannot let the PRC continue exploiting countries in need and take unfair advantage of international treaties and organizations. It is time that we give developing countries a better chance at participating in programs that are meant for them and not meant for the world's second largest economy. With that, I urge all my colleagues to vote yes, and I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1107, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
The People's Republic of China, PRC, is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the entire world. Yet, for too long, it has shirked its responsibility to do more to combat climate change on the world stage. The PRC does this by seeking and securing the status of a, quote, developing country in international treaties and organizations, despite being the world's second largest economy. This kind of special treatment needs to stop. China needs to pay its fair share to fight global challenges. That is why I stand here today to support the bipartisan measure by my colleagues Representative Young Kim and Representative Jerry Connolly. H.R. 1107 calls on the State Department to work diplomatically within all relevant international organizations and treaties where China is treated as a developing nation to change its status. It is time that the PRC should be ascribed the responsibilities commensurate with its global impact and power. The bill also ensures that U.S. diplomats will work to create mechanisms to consider such a change if they do not already exist. Most importantly, it will authorize our diplomats to work to ensure that the PRC is not getting special treatment, regardless of the status it has. Right now, China gets to have its cake and eat it too. It is bolstering its influence and presence in international organizations and treaties, all the while avoiding having to contribute its appropriate share to solving global problems. The PRC claims it's a responsible global power. This bill aims to hold it accountable by asking it to accept greater burden sharing for global problems. This is an important measure. I encourage my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United States and other developed nations of the world need to stop underwriting the belligerent expansion of the Chinese Communist Party's influence around the world. Since 1978, the economy of the People's Republic of China has reportedly grown 9% a year on average. Today, the PRC is the world's second largest economy and is a top goods exporter. Look at our balance of trade. Its outward direct investment exceeds that of 32 of the 36 OECD countries, and China's defense expenditures and number of satellites in space is second in the world, only behind the United States. That is why it is ridiculous that the PRC is still considered a developing country by international financial institutions, or IFIs, and in various treaty provisions intended to benefit genuinely poor nations. That designation allows the PRC to pay less in United Nations dues and assessments. It allows them to avoid stricter requirements in certain environmental agreements. And it allows the PRC to get preferential loans from international financial institutions, which the PRC then uses to offer predatory and unfair loans to actual developing countries, countries such as Sri Lanka, Djibouti, and Uganda, which have been placed into debt bondage by the PRC, often accompanied by bribery and corruption of local officials. This is just one way the PRC distorts the global economy to unfair trade and lending practices while hurting countries that are actually still genuinely developing. I want to thank my good friend from California, Young Kim, who chairs the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on the Indo-Pacific, for introducing this bill. It is smart, targeted legislation, and Jerry Connolly for his chief co-sponsorship as well. This legislation clearly states that the PRC is no longer a developing country and that the United States should seek to ensure that any future treaty, convention, or organizations we're a part of do not treat the PRC as one. The world must stop allowing the PRC to siphon benefits from other nations by taking advantage of an outdated and inaccurate developing country status. I urge support for the legislation. And reserve.
Does the gentleman reserve?
Reserve, yes.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time, and I am prepared to close if the other side has no further speakers.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1107 is an important bipartisan measure that calls out the People's Republic of China for failing to do its part in international organizations and treaties and calls on it to do more. At the same time, the diplomatic actions that this measure calls for highlight just how critical it is that the United States remain engaged and present in international and multilateral forums and treaties. We can only shape global decisions for the benefit of U.S. interests and can only counter the PRC if we are in the room. We have to negotiate and engage in diplomacy to advance our interests. Otherwise, as we have seen repeatedly, when the United States is absent or silent, China immediately swoops in to drive the international policy, conversation, and agenda in the direction it wants. So I support this bipartisan measure because it deepens both U.S. engagement in international treaties and organizations while trying to effectively counter the PRC's own self-interested actions in these forums. I hope my colleagues will join me and support this important bill. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
I urge unanimous support by this body for this important legislation and yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 1107, as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.
On that, I request the yeas and nays.
In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.
Mr. Speaker.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1189.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1189, a bill to require the development of a strategy to eliminate the availability to foreign adversaries of goods and technologies capable of supporting undersea cables and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast, and the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Wild, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 1189, the Undersea Cable Control Act. What is this about at a higher level? It's about this. Don't enable our adversaries. Don't allow them to become stronger than us, or to make us reliant upon them, or to catch up to us in any way whatsoever, especially China. How does this relate to the bill? Undersea cables, if you're not familiar, they carry about 99% of transoceanic digital communications. Think things like voice communications, data, internet, trillions of daily international financial transactions, things that you don't want China getting a hold of. They serve as the backbone, a framework really for global internet. These cables, they enable consumers, they enable businesses, they enable governments, and they enable the military to communicate securely with each other and to access the internet. That's pretty daggone important. So the United States derives significant benefits from its leading position in global subsea cable networks, which carry the vast majority of voice and internet traffic between continents. However, in recent years, Chinese companies, heavily subsidized, of course, by the PRC, the communist government, have started investing heavily in owning and supplying subsea cables. So I would say it in this way. Imagine if we allowed during the last Cold War the Soviet Union to buy up radio component companies in the United States of America and other places during that Cold War. What would things have been like? What kind of danger would that have been? That's the way that you should look at this. The U.S. has to look at the supply, the ownership of these cables as another front in our competition with the PRC, where their aim is to supplant, like anything, supplant the United States of America's position. This is not just an economic issue. The Chinese, they will steal information. They will make it unsecure. They want our transmissions. They weaponize all forms of telecommunication that they can. They weaponize every bit of social media that they can. They try to make these capabilities fit their own nefarious ends. So do we really think for a second that they would not do the same with undersea cables? I'm not going to be fooled into thinking that. That's why I've introduced the Undersea Cable Control Act. It is a bipartisan bill that will direct the president to develop a strategy to eliminate American technologies capable of supporting undersea cables from falling into the hands of our adversaries, blocking our adversaries' ability to develop and perfect undersea cable capabilities. It's a critical step for our security, and I thank you for listening to my opinions on this issue, and in that, I reserve.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1189, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
The United States faces a strategic competitor in China that, as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has stated, is determined to overtake U.S. technological leadership and is willing to devote nearly limitless resources to that goal. This technological competition will have a tremendous impact on our national security and economic interests. Beijing is trying to take the lead in building the world's digital infrastructure as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. Increasingly, this push includes a focus on undersea cables, which carry over 95% of all international internet traffic, according to a recent Reuters report. These cables transmit mundane things like emails and Facebook postings, but they also transmit more sensitive things such as financial transactions, as well as proprietary information or government secrets. It is in our interest and in the interest of our partners and allies that these crucial data pathways are not vulnerable to attacks and espionage, which is harder to do if they are built and operated by PRC entities. We got an example of that last month when two communications cables that connected Taiwan to two of its islands were cut by civilian PRC vessels, disconnecting 14,000 residents from the internet. This bipartisan measure by Representative Brian Mast and Representative Andy Kim aims to put the United States in a position to reduce such risks and win the competition over who gets to develop the physical infrastructure that will drive the digital commerce of the coming decades. H.R. 1189 requires the development of a strategy to eliminate the availability to foreign adversaries of goods and technologies capable of supporting undersea cables. It also calls on the Bureau of Industry and Security to apply export controls on the goods identified in the strategy and work with our partners to ensure those goods and technologies are not being exported to China. The United States needs to be proactive in the competition with the PRC. This important bipartisan measure is an example of how we can secure American and global interests by using U.S. policy tools in an effective and timely fashion. I encourage my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I reserve the right to close.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I have no further requests for time, Mr. Speaker, and I'm prepared to close if the other side has no further speakers.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1189 is a timely and forward-thinking bill. The United States is already engaged in a commercial competition with the PRC to win contracts to build undersea cables and create the technologies that power this vital infrastructure. It is important that the United States government have a proactive strategy to win this critical area of competition with the PRC. Some PRC companies involved in undersea cable development are actively engaged in helping to modernize the People's Liberation Army as part of China's civil-military fusion strategy. This raises clear national security concerns that warrant the use of export controls to ensure that American goods and technology are not contributing to that effort. This bill will result in coordination with our partners and our allies to ensure that Beijing is not able to compromise our national security through the development of PRC-sponsored undersea cables. I hope my colleagues will join me and support this important bill, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would just encourage us to look at the world in this way. Everything with China, everything with communists is competition. It's competition against America. It's competition against our democratic values, our way of life, the way that we operate, the way that we pride ourselves on freedom. And I don't kick well, but I'm prepared to kick their ass in anything, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. So now the question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1189? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today. The House will be in order. Proceedings will resume on questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. Motions to suspend the rules and pass House Resolution 1154, HR 1154 and HR 1107. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1154, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 1154, a bill to combat forced organ harvesting and trafficking in persons for purposes of the removal of organs and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 412, the nays are 2, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to On this vote, the yeas are 413, the nays are 2, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is now laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1107 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 1107, a bill to direct the Secretary of State to take certain actions with respect to the labeling of the People's Republic of China as a developing country and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 415, the nays are 0. 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The House will be in order. Please take your business off the floor unless you're about to speak. Order. The House will be in order. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr.
Order.
Speaker.
The House will be in order. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Mr. George Duke, the chairman and sole owner of Zippo Manufacturing Company. Started by George's grandfather in 1932, Zippo has become an American icon, from earning the nickname the GI's friend to becoming an international pop culture symbol. This famous windproof lighter transcends generations. Since its invention, every Zippo windproof lighter has been proudly manufactured in Bradford, Pennsylvania. George knows Zippo's success would not be possible without the local community, and he continually gives back to the place he calls home. Zippo's most recent investment in Bradford's future is through a generous gift to the University of Pittsburgh's Bradford campus. Last fall, the campus opened a new engineering and information technologies building, and thanks to Zippo's investment, students are learning the state-of-the-art engineering labs. This investment provides a hands-on cutting-edge experience for students, ultimately helping them pursue successful engineering careers in the region and beyond. Mr. Speaker, this investment goes beyond the walls of Pitt Bradford. It is an investment in our community and our future. On behalf of a grateful community, I thank George Duke for his tremendous dedication to building a thriving workforce in Pennsylvania's northern tier. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today with a very heavy heart. As a parent, my 11-year-old son is with me today on the House floor because it's spring break. I cannot imagine the pain and suffering that those parents in Nashville are experiencing. As a member of Congress, I can say that this is something that we can stop. It is complicated. We have a mental health crisis, and that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of energy. But the guns, that's one vote. To ban assault weapons, to tell the Defense Department, hey, buy all these Assault weapons, 20 million assault weapons, give them to the military where they belong, and pass criminal background checks for all the other guns. That's it, one vote. We're Congress, we can do it. With a single vote, we just need more of us. With that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the life of Dr. Jessica Miller Mullinex, a loving wife and doctor at Candler Hospital in Savannah. Jessica had practiced as an obstetrician gynecologist at Candler Hospital in Savannah for 4 years, building a loyal following of patients, colleagues, and coworkers. She graduated with magna cum laude honors from the University of Georgia in 2009 and the Mercer University School of Medicine in 2014. During her time at the Mercer University School of Medicine Savannah campus, she met her husband, Dr. Patrick Mullinex. She completed her residency at Eastern Virginia Medical School in Norfolk, Virginia in 2018 before joining the staff at Candler, where she was the first OBGYN to serve the Pooler area at the St. Joseph Candler Pooler campus. During her residency and 4 years at Candler, she delivered more than 1,000 babies. Despite her health struggles, Jessica continued to work full-time at Candler, fully dedicated to the many patients that depended on her. She will be dearly missed. Our thoughts and prayers are with her and her family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I was hopeful that this Congress would be able to work together on bipartisan permitting reform. Unfortunately, it looks like extreme MAGA Republicans are hijacking H.R. 1 to put polluters over people. They seek to silence the voice of the community while doing little to nothing to lower energy costs. Climate change is real. We need more American energy production across the board. Oil and gas workers in my district know that energy jobs can mean a real shot at the American dream for working families. But this extreme MAGA proposal won't create all the energy jobs we must to remain globally competitive. But it does do this. It increases the deficit by $2.4 billion. We shouldn't have to choose between dirty air and polluted water just to meet the energy needs of the future. H.R. 1 picks winners and losers. The wealthy and well-connected win, workers lose. Well, I believe in workers. House Democrats will continue to lower energy costs for everyone and give future generations a cleaner, healthier environment because we put people over polluters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
From what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek recognition to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to pay tribute to the life and legacy of Mrs. Linda Greenblatt, a beloved social studies teacher who passed away on March 18th after decades of service to the Red Hook Central School District. As a former student of Mrs. Greenblatt, I can attest to the profound impact she had in the classroom. She had a passion for teaching, and her lessons made students excited about history and government. But what I admire most about her is that she saw the potential in every student. She was the type of teacher that would allow students to do a project if they weren't able to take the test. This individualized approach helps students like me realize their strengths and achieve their goals. I thank her, as do so many, for being one of the people who got me interested in public service and helped me recognize that as a very young age, that every person has significant strengths and abilities. I ask my colleagues in the House to join me in honoring the memory of Mrs. Linda Greenblatt. May her legacy continue to inspire future generations of educators and students alike. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today because I am furious. Angry that 3 kids died today in Nashville, Tennessee. Angry that hundreds of parents had to cry their eyes out today, not knowing if their child would come home from school. And angry that we have to live day after day when we turn on the news to see rampant gun violence claiming life after life. And all of this is because politicians in this chamber that have been bought and paid for by the NRA, that put profits over people, over human lives. Cowards who wasted our time last week, passing a parental bill of rights, not giving a damn about the rights of children to be able to go to their classroom without the fear of being gunned down due to senseless gun violence. It is likely that at this moment, the next mass shooter is planning their shooting. What will this chamber do about it? I filed my last bill last week to simply create a federal office of gun violence prevention. 3 kids are dead today, and every day that we wait, 100 more people die. I pray to God that there are some Republicans in this chamber that can help support my legislation to save lives. I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to remember a giant in agriculture in the 15th Congressional District of Texas. Benno Luensmann of Seguin, Texas, passed away earlier this year after a storied career in Texas ag. Benno was successful in so many different areas that it's hard just to pick one. He and his brothers built their cattle business in Guadalupe County, a company grown from what his son called a beat-up cell barn that became a thriving enterprise. In addition to success in cattle, Benno served the community as the local fair president and on numerous local committees. In addition to his community service and cattle business, he was an educator, having taught at Seguin High School and Texas Lutheran University. He also served as a consultant to the USDA and spent time in Asia before returning home. Benno rightfully received recognition for his accomplishments and leaves behind a legacy in ag and the larger Seguin community. To his wife Shirley and his children Brian, Reagan, Yvonne, and Donna, thank you so much for sharing your father and husband with the community. He touched many generations of farmers and ranchers and his local community. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to highlight some of our unsung heroes of Eastern North Carolina, our school bus drivers. Mr. Speaker, our school bus drivers go above and beyond when it comes to getting the job done, and Miss Annie Day at Central Elementary School in Jackson, North Carolina is without exception. A native of Northampton County, Miss Day has been a school bus driver for nearly 50 years in the county where she grew up, making a daily impact on the lives of her 40 young passengers. In addition to being the first person to offer students a warm smile and greeting in the morning, she creates a caring, safe environment where children can feel secure and understood. Mr. Speaker, we need to do all we can to support school bus drivers to ensure every child across the 1st Congressional District in America has a champion like Miss Day. Let's tell a school bus driver thank you. Thank you, Miss Day, for nearly 50 years. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, American families are faced with historically high inflation and energy prices. Energy demand is expected to decrease by 50% by 2050. Gas and oil needs will increase, and they will be met, whether it's in this country or the other countries around the world that haven't gone all electric or being forced into doing so.
America's needs for minerals is growing, necessary for the defense and tech sectors. It's projected to grow actually exponentially. To meet each of these crises, an all-above approach is needed for domestic American energy. Unfortunately, the NEPA process, the permitting process, hinders American domestic energy expansion. For example, it can take a decade to open a new mine in the U.S., while other countries, such as Canada and Australia, take only 3 years to do the same. There's nothing new under the sun on what needs to be permitted. Get it done. The NEPA permitting process is filled with repetitive assessments, lengthy and expensive litigation, and bureaucratic hurdles. It's almost impossible for new energy and infrastructure projects to ever see the light of the day. But I think they want it that way. What, are we supposed to all live in caves and eat mealworms? That seems to be the direction we're going. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the VNA Hospice of Northwest Indiana for receiving a Level 5 status from the We Honor Veterans Program for the 3rd consecutive year. The women and men who volunteer to defend and protect our national security deserve every resource, consideration, and compassionate assistance when they return home. As a member of the House Veteran Affairs Committee and prior local elected official in Northwest Indiana for 15 years, I continue to be grateful for so many meaningful relationships with our veterans community, and I will continue to do all I can to ensure our veterans receive the care and benefits that they have earned. Mr. Speaker, please join me in congratulating the VNA Hospice of Northwest Indiana for this recognition and appreciation for their unwavering commitment to supporting our veterans and those who are in need. With that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to thank Bob and Linda Bracken of Port Washington for their 35 years of teaching in New York's 3rd Congressional District. I have had the privilege of meeting them today and showing them around this very chamber. Mr. Bob Bracken is chock full of knowledge, and he taught history courses for Port Washington Public Schools. His delightful wife, Mrs. Bracken, taught business courses in Great Neck South. Unspoken heroes like Mr. and Mrs. Bracken pave the way for future generations, and I would like to place their name and legacy into the congressional record. Mr. and Mrs. Bracken, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of New York's 3rd Congressional District for all your invaluable service to our communities. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, to
Without
revise and
objection, the
extend
gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
my remarks. Mr. Speaker, when I entered the House of Representatives, I was just one of 24 women serving in Congress. Today, there are 154 women in Congress out of 540 members of the House and Senate. What progress our country has made in recognizing and embracing the equal role of women in all aspects of our society. This Women's History Month, we have the opportunity to celebrate the success and sacrifices of those who have committed themselves to uplifting women, families, and our society. Meanwhile, let's also rededicate ourselves to continuing to fight for the advancement and security of our mothers, wives, sisters, grandmothers, godmothers, and daughters. It is more imperative than ever for us to carry forward the legacy of those who came before us and to do our part to pave the way for future generations. Let us embrace a world where there is no limit to what women can be and what we can achieve together. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to praise Teresa Maughan. The East Orange Educator is New Jersey's 2022 State Teacher of the Year. She teaches 10th grade social studies at East Orange STEM Academy, and she is an inspiration to everyone in my district. Ms. Maughan was born in Belize and immigrated to America when she was in elementary school. She was inspired to teach in her childhood by her own social studies teacher, and she has worked in education for 40 years. Ms. Mon tells her students that she tries to learn something new every day, and her commitment to my district's teachers and students has helped her win numerous awards, such as 2021 Essex County Teacher of the Year. So congratulations again to New Jersey's 2022 Teacher of the Year, Teresa Mon. She is a great example of how teachers benefit our lives and community every day. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise because it is Women's History Month. I rise because I returned from Michigan on the heels of a Women's History Month event that I held yesterday in Farmington Hills, where I looked the women of my district in the face and I promised them I will return to the House of Representatives and seek to enshrine your rights into law. Mr. Speaker, I rise because in the second year of this pandemic, women's maternal mortality increased by 40%. And in the following year, the Supreme Court repealed Roe v. Wade. I rise because 4 women in Texas are suing for their right for bodily autonomy. Women are standing up and saying that they do not want to be subject to sepsis while trying to give birth to a child. I rise because in South Carolina, women will be prosecuted at a deeper extent than a rapist. Mr. Speaker, I rise because I will not stop until we enshrine women's rights into the law of this land. Thank you, and I yield back.
Purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
A nightmare, a day of horror, and one that prayers and sympathy could not quash the deep and piercing pain that the parents of these babies in an elementary school, Christian school in Nashville, had to experience this morning at 10 a.m., and the loved ones of the adults that suffered an untimely death. How long is this Congress going to diddle-daddle around? How long are we going to be divided over the reality that a 28-year-old who went to the school had 2 AR-15s and a handgun? Oh, there's always a talk about the Second Amendment. I honor the Second Amendment, but I do not honor the violence of an assault weapon. How many more babies can we lose? How many more stories like Uvalde can we tolerate? How many more parents whose lives are just going to be snatched from them and they walk around, yes, like zombies? It is time now to ban the assault weapons. Ban them now. It is time to address mental health issues in a larger way. It is time for this Congress to come together. It is time to stop the nightmare and to stop the horror. How many more parents have to cry over dead babies? Ban assault weapons and do it now. I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9, 2023, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Jackson, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designated for the minority leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous materials on the subject of this special order. It is with great honor that I rise today to co-anchor this special CBC order hour.
Without objection.
Now
you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with great honor that I rise today to co-anchor this CBC special order hour alongside the Honorable Cori Bush of Missouri, founder of the first Congressional Caucus for the Equal Rights Amendment. For the next 60 minutes, members of the CBC have an opportunity to speak directly to the American people on finally getting the equal rights across the finish line and recognized as the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, 100 years after it was first introduced in the House of Representatives. An issue of great importance to the Congressional Black Caucus, Congress, the constituents we represent, and all Americans. I rise today to celebrate and honor the incredible efforts of African American women who have advocated for the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA, throughout history. Their resilience, passion, and determination have driven the relentless pursuit of gender equality and justice for all. In the 1970s, prominent black women like Paula Murray, Shirley Chisholm, Flo Kennedy, and Barbara Jordan were instrumental in advancing the cause of women's rights and the ERA. When the 28th Amendment is finally recognized as part of the United States Constitution, black women deserve to have significant credit for its passage. Their legacy reminds us of the power of unity, conviction, and perseverance in the face of adversity. Let us not forget the profound words of feminist lawyer and civil rights advocate Paula Murray, who testified for the ERA at a 1970 Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. And she said, as a constitutional lawyer, a woman, and a black person, I can say with conviction that black women as a group have the most to gain from the adoption of the Equal Rights Amendment. Let us draw strength from these words of Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, who proclaimed in her speech in 1970, I am for Equal Rights Amendment. This is what it comes down to. Artificial distinctions between persons must be wiped out of the law. Legal discrimination between the sexes is, in almost every instance, founded on outmoded views of society and the pre-scientific beliefs about physicology and psychology. It is time to sweep away these relics of the past and set future generations free of them, Mr. Speaker. Let us be inspired by the words of Representative Barbara Jordan, who said the Equal Rights Amendment is a mandate for change. It is a standard by which to measure all future legal and social constructs. The Equal Rights Amendment is for men and women. It is a constructive force for liberating the minds of men and the place of women. It is inclusive. As we pay tribute to these trailblazing black women, it is crucial to recognize that the fight for gender and racial equality is still ongoing. The number of black women in Congress remains disproportionately low compared to the diverse population they represent. As of today, only 57 women of African American ancestry out of 12,505 people to have served in this august body have ever served in this Congress, a mere fraction of the total number of representatives and senators who have shared and served throughout our nation's history. Only 2 African American women have ever served in the Senate, and none in the governor's mansion. The senators, Democratic Congresswoman Carol Moseley Braun, Democratic Senate Ms. Carol Moseley Braun of Illinois, elected in '92, and current Vice President Mrs. Kamala Harris. This underrepresentation is a call to action for all of us, a reminder that we must continue to strive for a government that is truly representative of the people it serves. We must also recognize that the fight for gender and racial equality is not limited to the halls of Congress. Across our nation, countless black women and women of color continue to face barriers in access to education, and access to health care, and access to employment opportunities, and access to equal pay. The struggle for justice and equality is a daily battle fought by millions of women who refuse to be silenced or sidelined in their pursuit of a more just and inclusive society. It is our responsibility as citizens and as leaders to ensure that the voices of black women and women of color are heard, their concerns are addressed, and their contributions are acknowledged and celebrated. We must work together to dismantle the systems of oppression and discrimination that continue to hold back so many of our sisters, daughters, mothers from reaching their full potential. And so, As we continue to push forward, let us remember the words of the great civil rights leader, Reverend Martin Luther King, who said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Let us then bend that arc towards justice together and make Equal Rights Amendment a reality for all. In the name of all those who have fought for justice, for equality, and for the rights of women, let us say amen. Amen. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it is now my privilege to yield to the Honorable Cori Bush of the state of Missouri, and I thank you.
St. Louis and I rise today for the Equal Rights Amendment. We rise on this historic occasion on the eve of the birth of the Congressional Caucus for the Equal Rights Amendment, a caucus I am proud to be founding tomorrow alongside my co-chair in service, my sister in service, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. We rise in the tradition of those who led this fight before us, those whose shoulders we now stand upon, shoulders like Pauli Murray, Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan. On the ERA Caucus Eve, this ERA Caucus Eve, as we near the close of Women's History Month, it is only fitting that we are here on the floor of this U.S. House of Representatives with our Congressional Black Caucus colleagues, because Black women have always been leaders of the fight to enshrine equality in our nation's Constitution. But we haven't always been in the headlines for leading that work. So today, we are here to declare that the reason the ERA is a priority for the CBC is because everyone in our communities has something to gain from its finalization, and Black women, girls, and queer folk have the most to gain. We are here continuing to lead, demanding exactly what is owed to us, equality. Because you see, the Constitution, in all its wisdom, guaranteed fundamental inalienable rights, but it stopped just short of guaranteeing those rights for everyone. Women, we were written out. And Black women, not only were we written out, but too many authors of the Constitution were busy enslaving, exploiting, and extracting the labor of our ancestors for profit, and were unconcerned with what is owed to us. Equal rights, nothing less. We need to start by being honest about who is harmed the most when equal rights are not enshrined in our Constitution. We know that without the ERA, the patchwork legislation that we have in place to protect women, including provisions of the Equal Pay Act, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Title IX, and the Violence Against Women Act, has primarily benefited and made gains for white women. Now is the time to build on those gains and expand protections for all women and LGBTQ plus folks, all of us too. This is our moment. 100 years since the ERA was introduced in this body. 100 years. This is our moment to finalize the ERA so that we modernize the Constitution and make sure the fight for equality not only includes but centers the people who have been left behind because we were written out of this document. 100 years, and all we're asking for is 24 words. In 24 words, 24 simple ones, the Equal Rights Amendment will add to our Constitution that equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. That's it. In other words, this amendment would make the we in the we the people become us, all of us. In doing so, the ERA can protect people from gender-based discrimination while simultaneously acting as a vehicle for progress. We see it here. This is just a portion. It can work to ensure permanent protections like fair wages, like violence prevention, like healthcare equity, like reproductive freedom, like LGBTQ plus rights, and like much else we not only deserve, but are entitled to and are owed. Equality and nothing less. That's what we're asking for. But we need the ERA, and we need it now, because equality is overdue. Equality is overdue. I rise in support of the Equal Rights Amendment today on the shoulders of the scores of Black women and LGBTQ plus people who have toiled on this initiative for 100 whole years to amplify their calls they made in this very chamber and outside of it, calls that resonate today even as the attacks against us intensify, calls to publish the ERA now. Publish the ERA now. Publish the Equal Rights Amendment now, because equality is overdue. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the Honorable Congresswoman Cori Bush for her remarks. I would like to yield controlling the balance of time to my distinguished colleague, the Honorable Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of the state of Texas.
Let me thank the distinguished gentleman for his leadership and very important and humbling experience to be able to, may I have that poster, please? The one you just moved. Excuse me. Very important topic this evening that brings us all together. And let me thank Congresswoman Cori Bush for the vibrancy, along with Ayanna Pressley, in the organizing of the ERA caucus. And it is important that we work together to ensure that the Equal Rights Amendment becomes law. I'm reminded of my entering Congress, and I don't know if anyone would realize that there was a statute for suffragette women, women in the early 1900s who were seeking for the women's right to vote. Even earlier than that, Sojourner Truth, who we galvanized around with the Congress, National Congress for Black Women, to provide an opportunity for Sojourner Truth to even have a statute here as an early suffragette and an abolitionist. When I came, the statute honoring women who fought for women's rights and the right to vote was in the basement. And it was women, members of Congress and the Senate, that had to organize and fight to lift that very awesome sculpture out of the basement, covered by dust, to be able to be put in the rotunda. We still have work undone because it was a half-finished sculpture. And African-American women argued that they did not have Sojourner Truth in that statute, who was an abolitionist and a leader on women's rights. We did, through legislation, myself and Senator Clinton, we did, in fact, get a statue sculptured by an African-American woman of Sojourner Truth. She now remains in Emancipation Hall, and our task is not yet finished to be able to place her in the rotunda along with the other statue. But I say that to say that this caucus, this announcement couldn't be more important. And the reason is because Black women were very instrumental in having the loudest voices, realizing that even then, Black women had the lowest per hourly wage. Black women were still domestic workers. Black women were not, in fact, equal in many aspects of the law. Pauli Murray, who I honor, Shirley Chisholm, Flo Kennedy, all of whom I remember and know, and Barbara Jordan are a few of the prominent black women who have advocated for the Equal Rights Amendment in the 1970s. Many black organizations endorsed the ERA, including the National Black Feminist Organization, the NAACP, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and 1970s Gallup polls showed that 60% of black women wanted the ERA. This has been a long history, and there's a long history of activism that black women and women of color in support of women's rights and the ERA, stated by historian and professor of Africana Studies, Dr. Mary Phillips. Today, black women still play a critical role in pushing for the ERA. In 3 states to recently ratify the ERA, black women were at the forefront. Nevada Senator Pat Spearman led the successful campaign for ratification of the ERA in her state in 2017, and Representative Juliana Stratton made extensive floor speeches in support of the ERA in Illinois. And as well, Jennifer McKellen led the successful effort to ratify the ERA in Virginia, finally bringing the total ratification of the ERA to 38 states required to become part of the Constitution. And yet, we did not make our mark. Yet, we have more work to do. Yet, we are struggling to ensure that in 2023, black women will have equal rights in the court. Black women will have equal rights in health care. Black women will have equal rights in education. Black women will have equal rights in the issue of sexual assaults and rape when women are charged with agreeing or consent, which is not true. Equal rights to be heard, equal rights in work, equal rights in payments. And so I rise today to support my colleagues and really to acknowledge these brave and historic women. So proud that my predecessor, the Honorable Barbara Jordan, was one of those who stood regally tall, along with the first African-American woman in the United States Congress, Shirley Chisholm. And then, of course, Flo Kennedy. Who could forget Flo Kennedy wearing those hats? And feminist lawyer and civil rights advocate Pauli Murray, who testified for the Equal Rights Amendment at a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing in 1970. In her testimony, Murray drew up upon her own experience of race and sex. And these are her words. Although my motivation, energy, and effort to meet the higher standards of performance have been operative throughout my life, I have experienced numerous delays in my career, not for the traditional reasons given for the failure of women to develop on par with men in our society, marriage, childbearing, etc., but by combining a combination of individual and institutional racism and sexism, Jim Crow and June Crow. As a constitutional lawyer, a woman, and a black person, I can say with conviction that black women, as a group, have the most to gain from the adoption of the Equal Rights Amendment. All that has been said about the frustration and deprivations of American women, generally because of discrimination by reason of sex, can be said with special force about the position of black women. And so my concluding remarks, maybe she didn't call herself a fighter for the ERA, but Harriet Tubman was a fighter for justice and took slaves out of the Deep South. And her words were this: if you hear the dogs coming, keep on moving. If you hear the noise, keep on moving. If you see the lights, keep on moving, because if you want a taste of freedom, keep on moving. Tonight, we stand here for freedom and the Equal Rights Amendment. With that, I yield back, and I thank the distinguished gentleman for his kind yielding at this time. Thank you.
I thank the Honorable Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee for those outstanding remarks. I would like to yield controlling the balance of my time to the Honorable Ayanna Pressley of the state of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Congressman Jackson, and I'm so appreciative that we have male colleagues like you who do see this as a shared fight, and we appreciate your leadership and partnership in this moment. Of course, I want to thank my sister in service, my partner in good on so many issues of consequence, Representative Cori Bush, for your leadership, your ingenuity, and your partnership. I never grow tired of your saying, St. Louis and I rise, for I know every time that you say that, St. Louis and those that are the most marginalized, ignored, left out, and left behind are being advanced in that moment, that justice is on the way. As Black women who have earned the right to be members of this august body, we find ourselves at the intersection of both race and gender. Some of the most profound and most impactful policies come directly from our lived experiences. Each day as we walk these sacred halls of power, we see statues and portraits of white men that serve as reminders of the inequality and the lack of parity in these halls, in our nation's past and present. For centuries, the contributions of Black women have been excluded from the narrative and marginalized in history, but not today. Today, there will be no erasure. We will give all the flowers to Shirley Chisholm and Barbara Jordan and Polly Murray. Black women, they believed, are inherently valued and our equality is a necessity. And they advocated for the ERA to codify those truths in our Constitution. But ratifying the ERA is not only about history, it is about the here and now. Black women are still organizing at the forefront of the women's rights movement. Zakiya Thomas, Christian Nunes, Melanie Campbell, Fatima Goss Graves are community builders and organizational leaders that are working daily to get the job done. Black women, justice seekers, truth tellers, pace setters, table shakers, always doing the work of liberation, even when our own was often sacrificed. I feel especially encouraged and emboldened that Black women are a part of the multi-generational and multiracial coalition leading and working in an intersectional way to advance policy change. This Congress, I introduced a joint resolution to finally make the Equal Rights Amendment the 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America, but I did not introduce it alone. I was joined by Congresswoman Kamala Dove, Madeline Dean, Sylvia Garcia, Abigail Spanberger, and of course, my partner in good, my sister in service, and co-chair of the Equal Rights Caucus, Representative Cori Bush. When the Equal Rights Amendment was put forward 100 years ago, the coalition was not as diverse nor as inclusive. As a Black woman who has experienced firsthand many of the daily indignities of an unequal society and heard stories from my mother, Sandy, may she rest in peace and power, who throughout her career had to train men who were paid more and promoted over her. I know how transformative the ERA will be for millions of women and our LGBTQ siblings across this country. It is long past time the Constitution affirms our equality and our very existence in the eyes of the law. The ramifications run deep as women face daily sexism, pregnancy discrimination, pay inequities, sexual violence, and persistent legislated attacks on our bodily autonomy. We need the ERA now. So I stand stridently with my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus and my co-chair of the new ERA caucus to demand that Congress does its job, pass our resolution, and codify the Equal Rights Amendment into the U.S. Constitution. I have no doubt that in short order, there will be a calendar one day that will cite, on this day in history, the ERA caucus was established. Well, I look forward to the day that there will also be a calendar that notes, on this day in history, the ERA was passed. And I yield.
I thank the Honorable Ayanna Pressley for her advocacy, and I appreciate her remarks. I would like to yield controlling the balance of my time to the Honorable Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of the state of Ohio. Congresswoman Beatty. Thank you, Congresswoman Beatty, for your service.
Mr. Speaker, to our Special Order Congressional Black Caucus Chairman, Congressman Jonathan Jackson, it is my honor to stand here with you to thank you for your leadership and for all that you are doing, and to be a Black man standing, talking about the Equal Rights Amendment with us as members of the Congressional Black Caucus. It also gives me great pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to be here tonight as the 9th woman to chair the Congressional Black Caucus, standing alongside with my colleagues as we pay tribute to countless advancements, achievements, and hard-fought victories by Black women to advance the Equal Rights Amendment. But let me just say, what an honor to thank Chairwoman of tonight's Special Order Hour, Congresswoman Cori Bush, and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. You will hear tonight the words like sojourner, truth tellers, fighters for freedom. That is just what you are. My sister, my friend, thank you for all that you do. We stand here tonight on the heels of Black History Month, in the heart of Women's History Month. And we do so at such a critical time in our nation's history. You see, we stand on the shoulders of giants, sheroes who paved the way for the fight for civil rights, women's rights. Today, women like us in this room and countless women across the nation, women like Mary Church Terrell, unbought and unbossed Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, Flo Kennedy, Polly Murray, Eileen Hernandez, who were instrumental in elevating the cause of women's equality and the ERA. Women like we've heard about already, Senator Spearman to Lieutenant Governor Stratton to our very own Jennifer McClellan of Virginia. Black women led the way. And it's interesting when we say, what did it get us? Whose shoulders do we stand on? It seems fitting for me to say today, as we bring members of Delta Sigma Theta sorority to the Capitol to fight for some of those same rights, as they did in 1913, when, yes, it was 22 Black women who brought up the rear of the march for the Women's Suffrage March. It's important for me to highlight today on this chart, 9 women have served as leaders of the Congressional Black Caucus, making history, fighting for equal rights. But for that, we would not have, as noted here, Vice President Kamala Harris, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. We would not have 2 Black women in America today, CEOs of 100 Fortune companies, just 2. We would not have in the halls of this Capitol 2 women, statues, Rosa Parks, brought to the Capitol by members, us, fighting for justice. We would not have from the state of Florida one of their 2 statues, Mary McLeod Bethune, nor would we have the only woman when we started, 1971, the Congressional Black Caucus, no other than Shirley Chisholm. And nor would we have Edna Charity Early, the first Black officer in the Women's Auxiliary. So we've come a long way, and we could put petitions and posters around this whole chamber of why we come today. So let me conclude to say I am joining my colleagues to demand Congress to act, to finally adopt the Equal Rights Amendment into the United States Constitution, because as I love saying, when women succeed, America succeeds. And the late Maya Angelou stated, each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it possibly, without claiming it, she stands up for all women. Today, Congresswoman Bush, Congresswoman Pressley, we stand up with you. I yield back my time.
I sincerely thank the Honorable Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of the state of Ohio. I would like to yield the controlling balance of time to my esteemed colleague, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke of the great state of New York. Congresswoman Clarke.
I thank the gentleman from Illinois, Jonathan Jackson, for yielding me time. Mr. Speaker, I rise on this day to acknowledge and thank Congresswoman Cori Bush and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley for their unyielding, unflinching, unapologetic leadership, for leading the charge on the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. I rise today to reaffirm the ever-present need to have this ratification take place, as well as to recognize the tireless efforts and work of Black women on behalf of that mission. It was more than half a century ago that the ERA first passed Congress, due in large part to the efforts in drafting, advancing, organizing by trailblazing Black women. With that said, I'm reminded of the words written by one of my congressional predecessors, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, decades ago in the very spot that I stand right now. And I quote, "Of course, laws will not eliminate prejudice from the hearts of human beings, but that is no reason to allow prejudice to continue to be enshrined in our laws, to perpetuate injustice through inaction," end quote. Folks, we are tired of the inaction. We are tired of the injustice. We are tired of being tired. And so it is my privilege to join the first ever Congressional Equal Rights Amendment Caucus in history and support legislative efforts to affirm the ERA as the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. For decades, Black women have continued to pave the path towards ratification. And I'm proud to see we are carrying on that legacy today. So in closing, I want to thank every woman who has played a significant and substantial role and continue to play their positions in this battle and in this fight for equal rights. And as the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey has admonished us, to each and every woman out there, forward ever, backwards never. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jonathan, I yield back.
Thank you. It is my privilege to recognize the Honorable, I want to thank Congresswoman Yvette Clarke for her outstanding remarks. It is now my privilege to yield my time to the Honorable Congressman Payne from the great state of New Jersey. Donald Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Jackson, from the great state of Illinois for the opportunity to speak with you today. Also, let me acknowledge my colleagues that are leading this fight. The Honorable Cori Bush from the great state of Missouri, and the Honorable Ayanna Pressley from the great state of Massachusetts, and all the women that have held us down in the struggle. There would not be the great strides of African American men if it were not for African American women. And I understand that, and I appreciate that every day. I rise today to discuss the tremendous work of African American women in the continued fight to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. And I want to thank, once again, Representative Bush for hosting this special order hour tonight, This Equal Rights Amendment is one of America's most important pieces of legislation. The amendment would guarantee equal and legal rights for all Americans, regardless of gender. And as amazing a document as it was, it is amazing how many people were left out of it. It was written 100 years ago by Alice Paul, a New Jersey advocate for women's rights. Well, first I meant the Constitution left so many people out, but Ms. Paul, a New Jersey advocate for women's rights, was the author. There have been several prominent African-American women who have made significant contributions to the nation's fight for equal rights, the Equal Rights Amendment. Pauli Murray was a lawyer and a civil rights advocate who wrote the book, States, Laws on Race and Color. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall called her book, the Bible of the Civil Rights Movement. Shirley Chisholm was the first African-American woman in Congress, and she was introduced dozens of bills for gender and racial equality. Flo Kennedy challenged the representation of African Americans in the media and advertising. Barbara Jordan was a lawyer and the first African American woman from the South to be elected to Congress. And many of my congressional colleagues continue their fight for women's rights every single day. I am proud to be from a state with a long history of support for women's rights. In 1790, New Jersey was the first state to enfranchise women in its constitution. Then New Jersey's constitution was written in 1947 to include equal rights for women. But that was only white women. In New Jersey, equal rights have been the law for 76 years. And thanks to New Jersey's Constitution, it is impossible to take those rights away. That is why we need a national Equal Rights Amendment. And I'm so proud of the gentlelady from Missouri for spearheading this fight. It would keep extremist legislators from taking the hard-earned rights of women away from them. But if you look now in what's going on in this country, there is an effort to take the rights away from many people, making it harder to vote, eliminating polling sites in minority areas, not allowing people to get drinking water handed to them from someone else. There is already an assault on turning the clock back. Is that what making America great again is all about? Returning to a day where people don't have the equal rights, making sure that minorities have a more difficult time exercising their right. Everyone thought that Roe v. Wade was the accepted law of the land. And look at where that has gone. Chipping away at rights slowly but surely. And why, when African Americans got the right to vote, why was it only for a period of 25 years? And then we have to revisit this topic every 25 years. Should we let blacks vote or should we not? That baffles me. That absolutely baffles me. Why was it not just made the law of the land and
Forget about it. Well, it's because of times like now where we see what is going on. We're turning the clock back. We're questioning whether or not people should have the equal right to vote. We're in a very dangerous time in this country. People arming themselves with AR-15s, someone requesting that that be made the national gun of this country. We're in a very dangerous time. And now the extremist Supreme Court has taken the fundamental right to determine their own health care away from them, their own bodies. One day you say that the government is too much in your business and your privacy, but you want to go take a woman's right to her health care. You want to be involved in that, but you don't want the government involved in anything that's important to you. But you feel you have the right to determine what another woman does with her body. It's hypocritical. It's hypocrisy. We must not let the legal rights that women deserve be taken away from them. That is why we must pass the ERA, and we must pass it now. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of the time.
I thank the Honorable Donald Payne Jr. for his remarks. It is now my privilege to yield the Honorable Congresswoman, Mr. Speaker, may I ask for the balance the remainder of time?
The gentleman has 18 minutes remaining.
I'd like to yield the balance of the remainder of my time for the Honorable Alma Adams of North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, let me thank the gentleman from Illinois for co-hosting this special order hour with the gentle lady from Missouri. And I do want to thank her, Representative Cori Bush, as well as Representative Presley for spearheading the ERA and for working toward this fight for all of us. I rise today to observe Women's History Month and to reiterate this year's Black History Month theme of Black resistance. And since we last celebrated Black History Month and Women's History Month, Ketanji Brown Jackson became the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. Beyonce claimed the record for most Grammys won in a lifetime. Serena Williams retired as one of the most accomplished athletes of all times. Congresswoman Summer Lee became the first Black woman to represent Pennsylvania in Congress, and Jennifer McClellan became the first Black woman Congresswoman from Virginia. In my home of Charlotte, North Carolina, Vi Lyles made history as both the longest-serving woman and the longest-serving Black mayor in our city's history. And in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, my friend and mentor, the late Annie Brown Kennedy, the first Black woman to serve in the North Carolina General Assembly, passed away at the age of 98 after a long and storied career. These women joined the legacy of other women we're celebrating here today, the women who helped lead the movement for the adoption of the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment is still absolutely necessary because according to the Constitution, we are not equal. Well, just look at the Dobbs decision. Look at all of the legislation from the state to the federal level that aims, intentionally or not, to tell women what they can do with their own bodies. And look at the maternal health crisis in America. Even as science, technology, and healthcare make amazing advances, the number of women dying due to childbirth is going in the wrong direction, and Black women have mortality rates that are 3 times that. As Women's History Month comes to an end, we must continue to teach the history of women, of Black women, Indigenous women, LGBTQ women, and women of color from the halls of our campuses to the halls of Congress. Because if you learn women's history, you learn very quickly how far we've come and how much farther we have to go. Each of us have a role in this history. If you learn this history, teach it. If you live this history, make it. So join me and join us, join the CBC and all of my colleagues in renewing the push for the Equal Rights Amendment and equality for women, not only in the United States, but across the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the gentleman from Illinois. I yield back. Thank you very much.
I thank the Honorable Congresswoman Alma Adams for her remarks. It is now my privilege to yield to the Honorable Congresswoman Shontel Brown from the state of Ohio.
Thank you so much. Mr. Speaker, thank you to my wonderful colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus for organizing this session tonight. I join them today in recognizing the significant contributions of Black women to the advancement of the Equal Rights Amendment. Of the more than 12,000 Americans who have served in Congress, only 58 have been Black women. Remarkably, despite our historic and continuous small number among the members of the House, Black women have often been the driving force behind significantly policy shifts that have paved the way for change. Among those achievements are landmark bills like the Equal Rights Amendment, championed by Black women since its inception. A hero of many Americans inside and outside Capitol grounds, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm was a relentless advocate for equal rights in America, nicknamed Fighting Shirley. She stood on this very floor in her first term and decreed that the ERA was destined to become the law of the land. Today, we honor her legacy by advocating for the long overdue ratification of the ERA. Congresswoman Chisholm did not stand alone in her fight for equal rights. From educator and activist Mary Church Terrell in the late 19th and early 20th centuries to Congresswoman Barbara Jordan in the 1970s, Black advocates for women's suffrage helped drive the ERA forward. In recent years, we've seen leaders fight for state ratification of the ERA, including our newest colleague, Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan, who, along with two Black female colleagues, State Rep Carol Foy and fellow State Senator Mamie Locke, led the final charge that resulted in Virginia becoming the 38th state to ratify the amendment in 2020. And that legacy lives on as my colleagues in the 118th Congress maintain and build on the work of our predecessors. With Representative Presley's efforts to remove the constitutional deadline for ratification and Representative Bush's leadership of the first ever Congressional ERA caucus, we are closer to ratification than ever before. I stand in awe of the power, strength, and contributions of these trailblazers and icons, both past and present. As we continue the fight today, it is an honor to work alongside my Democratic Women's Caucus colleagues to enshrine the ERA in the Constitution, continuing the legacy work started by the Black women who came before me. Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm envisioned the ERA as the law of the land in 1969. She once said she wanted to be remembered as a woman who dared to be a catalyst of change. And she will always be known as just that. Like our ancestors, Terrell, Chisholm, Jordan, and more, Black women will continue to help lead the charge, but we cannot do it alone. So to my colleagues who have yet to join us in champion equal rights, I say to you, dare to become a catalyst of change with us. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
I would like to thank the Honorable Congresswoman Shontel Brown for her remarks. It is now my privilege to yield to the Honorable Kamlager Dove, Congresswoman from the city of Los Angeles, state of California.
Thank you, brother, friend, Congressman Jackson from the great state of Illinois, for managing this Congressional Black Caucus Special Order Hour and standing with your sisters. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the work that my CBC colleagues are doing as we continue fighting to enshrine the Equal Rights Amendment into our Constitution. The ERA was sent to the states for ratification in 1972. As we reflect on the 100 years since the ERA, attempts to ratify the amendment each year have faded. What's old has become new again, but the state of gender equality in our country has sadly remained unchanged. Why all the controversy? And why such difficulty in giving women the protection of the Constitution that should have been given to us long ago? It is 2023. There is no reason that an arbitrary deadline should prevent women from having basic fundamental rights under the Constitution. Around the country, women, especially women of color, continue to face discrimination in healthcare, in the workforce, in the boardroom, in the schools, and in everyday life. Enough states have finally ratified the ERA, but it is past time that it becomes an official part of our Constitution and give every woman in America full protection under the law. So if you support women, you should support the ERA. And if you don't support women, stand up and say why you don't think your mother, your daughter, your sister, your aunt, your grandmother deserves equal rights. My colleagues, Representative Cori Bush and Representative Ayanna Pressley, have led a renewed charge to add a 28th Amendment to our Constitution and enshrine the ERA into law. I thank them for their commitment to confronting gender equality in the face of disheartening challenges. The first ever Equal Rights Amendment caucus is dedicated to this cause, and as vice chair and co-lead of Representative Pressley's resolution, I stand arm in arm with my colleagues as we bring this battle home. I'm going to say this charge is being led by Black women. Historically, we are the ones who take up the mantle of equality and fight to not only uphold our democracy, but to move it forward. Abolition, suffrage, civil rights, all of these movements supported Black women even though they were not always recognized for their leadership and courage. A glaring irony of gender discrimination. I'm going to say the names again. Mary Church Terrell, Shirley Chisholm, Pauli Murray, Nevada Senator Pat Spearman, and even our own Jennifer McClellan. These activists have led fierce fights for gender equality to uplift Black women and women across the country. In fact, Pauli Murray once said, if anyone should ask a Negro woman in America what has been her greatest achievement, her honest answer would be, I survived. We must recognize the work of these pioneers as we continue their fight today. The ERA would allow Congress, federal agencies, and courts to address the needs of women as they relate to pay equity, pregnancy discrimination, sexual harassment and violence, abortion access, and LGBTQ protections. Because women are insulted, harassed, demeaned, demoted, and assaulted just for being women. So enshrining these rights brings our Constitution into the 21st century. We might have been written out, but don't count us out. We will persevere until we can finally celebrate the addition of a 28th Amendment to secure equal rights and a better and brighter future for our children and the women that we love. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the Honorable Congresswoman Sydney Kamlager-Dove for her remarks. It is now my privilege to yield to the Honorable Member from the great state of Pennsylvania, Congresswoman Summer Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, acknowledging and thanking our convener, the gentleman from Illinois, and the bold and brave women, our colleagues Cori Bush and Ayanna Pressley, who have put together this convening as well, and also all the women on whose shoulders we stand, particularly those who brought an intersectional perspective and urgency to the fight for all women throughout this country, but also adding on to that urgency and reminding that it's Women's History Month in the year 2023, and yet we pretend to be surprised that a document written by rich, land-owning white men in the 18th century does not protect my rights. We pretend to be surprised that a document that saw my black ancestors as property until the 19th century legally does not yet empower people who look like me. And we're so surprised that a document that did not allow women the right to participate in our democracy through voting, let alone the right to have land or a bank account until the 20th century, is in need of an update. Well, I'm not surprised. Actually, I'm pissed. I stand today as one of the vice chairs, the new vice chairs of the ERA caucus, to demand the obvious need for a constitutional amendment so that our future daughters and granddaughters, mine and yours, are not discussing what we failed to do in the 21st century. Yes, I stand today frustrated that it's not obvious to all elected members of Congress that the rights of all women, and specifically black women, need to be protected. As we are wrapping Women's History Month, I remain steadfast in making sure that our daughters and granddaughters of the future do not have to continue to discuss this. Constitutional equality is powerful. Women and states have done their part to ratify the ERA, as we've heard, including our new colleague who is joining us in the 118th. But now Congress must swiftly follow suit. We must take this action to move one step closer to enshrining the dignity, the humanity, and the equality of all people into the highest law in the land. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield my time back.
I thank the Honorable Congresswoman Summer Lee for her remarks from the great state of Pennsylvania. It is now my pleasure to introduce, my privilege to yield to the Honorable Congresswoman from the great state of Virginia, Jennifer McClellan. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Representative Jackson for convening this special order, and Representative Cori Bush and Ayanna Pressley for your leadership in creating the Congressional ERA Caucus. I rise today as the first black woman to represent Virginia, the birthplace of American democracy and the birthplace of American slavery. I rise as the former state legislator who led Virginia to become the 38th and final state necessary to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And it is poetic justice that Virginia was the final state necessary for ratification. It's been a long march towards equality in Virginia's history. In 1619, when the first women were recruited to Jamestown, it was to make wives to the inhabitants, and their rights were surrendered to their husbands. They couldn't vote, they couldn't hold public office, they couldn't control their own property. African American women who arrived in 1619 were considered property and had fewer rights, if any at all. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence established the principle that all men were created equal with inalienable rights. They didn't mean me. And when the Constitution was developed for we the people in order to form a more perfect union, it didn't include me. The Constitution purported to create a government by, of, and for the people, but not for me, only for white men. And for the past centuries, we've made major progress to secure the blessings of liberty for every American, thanks to the struggle and sacrifice of black women who were in the fight from the beginning, but were the last to benefit from our work. We were there in the fight to abolish slavery. As you heard, we were there in the fight for women's suffrage, even when we were told to march in the back. We marched for civil rights in the 1960s, even though we weren't given a speaking role. We have fought, organized, and marched for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment for over 100 years. And it is absurd that 100 years after the ERA's introduction,
that women still do not have the same constitutional rights as men. That is why I am not only committed, but honored to carry on this fight in Congress with my sisters in this fight, with Representatives Bush and Presley in the Congressional ERA caucus. Women across our nation have waited too long for equality. It is our time. Publish the ERA today so that tomorrow our daughters don't have to fight this same fight. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Representative Jennifer McClellan, our newest member. Mr. Speaker, you've heard from my distinguished colleagues about our topic on ERA, all issues of great importance to the Congressional Black Caucus. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back to the Honorable Richard McCormick from the great state of Georgia, my fellow HBCU graduate.
Thank you, sir. And
I motion to adjourn.
Just for the record, members are reminded to avoid vulgarity in their remarks, just overall. The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor? Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate. Thank you, sir.